they're petrified
Yeah.
of some kind of backlash. I mean, you see with Disney now. I mean, Disney, one of the most gay-friendly companies that we've had in a very long time.
Hard.
And Disney decided to hire the most insufferable girl boss narcissist that exists on Earth, who hates Snow White.
Yeah. This would have been a lot better if they, had a strong male along with her.
Was Disney's Snow White remake simply a fairy tale gone wrong? Or something far more significant? A self-inflicted corporate catastrophe revealing a deeper crisis within the Magic Kingdom? From the moment those initial, heavily anticipated trailers flickered onto screens, a palpable sense of unease settled over the internet. It wasn't just muted excitement, it was something akin to collective apprehension. Critics, initially granted early access, began to whisper warnings. Audiences usually eager for Disney magic seemed hesitant, their anticipation replaced by a cautious skepticism. And then, the online reaction exploded. A tidal wave of negativity, memes mocking the visuals, comment sections overflowing with outrage. But this wasn't just another run-of-the-mill bad movie stumbling at the box office. This was a cultural flashpoint, a film inexplicably tangled in a Gordian knot of controversies that stretched far beyond the usual gripes about plot holes or poor special effects. The central question isn't merely why Snow White 2025 failed to enchant, but rather, what does this very public misstep reveal about the current state of Disney itself? What does it tell us about the future of storytelling and the delicate dance of reimagining beloved classics for a world that is changing at breakneck speed? The casting announcement of Rachel Zegler as Snow White should have been a triumphant moment, a celebration of fresh talent, and a step towards more inclusive representation. Instead, it quickly became the first hairline fracture in the seemingly flawless fairy tale facade. While a segment of the audience enthusiastically applauded the diversity, viewing it as a long overdue update, a significant and vocal portion of the public registered a growing unease, an almost instinctual sense that something about this entire project was fundamentally misaligned, already veering off course. Initial excitement, the typical buzz that accompanies any Disney live-action remake, was noticeably muted, replaced by a cautious and sometimes outright critical commentary. Whispers of concern morphed into louder, more insistent questions as early glimpses and leaked set photos trickled out, hinting at a film that looked, felt, and sounded drastically different from the cherished 1937 animation that had captivated generations. Before cameras even finished rolling, before a single frame of the final cut was even seen by the wider public, the seeds of profound doubt had been irrevocably sown, and the initial spark of hopeful anticipation had begun to curdle into a pervasive skepticism that would prove remarkably difficult to overcome. But even the most pessimistic predictions couldn't have foreseen just how much more fuel would be systematically poured onto this already smoldering fire in the long, drawn-out months leading up to the film's ill-fated release. Then came the avalanche of interviews, the carefully orchestrated press junkets designed to generate positive buzz and drum up excitement. And it was precisely there, in those seemingly innocuous promotional appearances, that things catastrophically exploded. Rachel Zegler, positioned as the fresh, modern face of Snow White, began to not just reinterpret, but openly and repeatedly dismiss the original, universally acclaimed 1937 animated masterpiece, describing it with dismissive terms like outdated, creepy, and even condescendingly scoffing at the very romantic elements, the iconic Prince Charming, the fairy tale love story, that were not just central to its narrative, but deeply embedded in its cultural DNA. Her words landed with the force of a deliberate slap in the face to generations of devoted Disney fans worldwide. For many, it wasn't merely a matter of differing artistic interpretations. It felt like a blatant act of disrespect, a deliberate and unnecessary rejection of the very foundation upon which Disney had painstakingly built its global entertainment empire. This wasn't simply about a personal artistic preference. It was widely perceived as a direct, almost aggressive attack on a universally cherished cultural touchstone, a beloved piece of shared cinematic history. Adding insult to injury and further fanning the flames of public discontent, Disney itself remained conspicuously silent. The studio, usually so adept at managing public perception and navigating delicate PR situations, seemed inexplicably unwilling or perhaps strategically paralyzed, unable to effectively address the rapidly escalating outrage. This deafening silence from the corporate giant only served to amplify the already potent feeling that loyal admirers, those who had grown up on Disney magic and continued to support the brand, were being actively ignored, their deeply held affection for the original story callously cast aside in favor of something else entirely, something that felt alien and, to many, deeply unwelcome. And what, indeed, of those undeniably iconic Seven Dwarfs? In yet another decision that ignited immediate and intense controversy, Disney, in what was presented as a progressive move, publicly announced their intention to replace the traditionally depicted dwarfs with vaguely defined magical creatures. The studio's stated rationale was couched in terms of avoiding the perpetuation of harmful stereotypes, a seemingly noble aim in the current social climate. However, the dwarfism community itself, the very group this change ostensibly aimed to protect and uplift, voiced surprisingly strong and unified objections. Leading voices and advocacy groups within the dwarfism community argued forcefully and persuasively that this decision was not, in fact, progressive at all, but rather a misguided form of erasure, effectively eliminating vital and demonstrably scarce acting opportunities for talented performers with dwarfism. Instead of fostering genuine inclusivity and representation, it inadvertently felt like a form of symbolic dismissal, suggesting that actors with dwarfism were somehow inherently problematic or undesirable within the context of this classic fairy tale narrative. The eventual unveiling of the final film revealed computer-generated versions of these magical creatures, bizarre CGI stand-ins that looked less like enchanting beings and more like, well, just oddly proportioned CGI creations. This ultimately unsatisfying and visually jarring solution managed to appease almost absolutely no one. It seemed to many observers that in striving so strenuously, perhaps even performatively, to avoid one perceived social problem, Disney had clumsily stumbled headfirst into another, creating a visually hollow and emotionally vacant spectacle that conspicuously lacked the genuine heart, authentic representation, and inherent charm that audiences instinctively associate with the original Snow White. But the widely criticized dwarf debacle, as significant and damaging as it was to the film's reputation, was ultimately just one particularly prominent and painful piece of a far larger, far more deeply rooted and increasingly complex puzzle of missteps and miscalculations. Almost inevitably, the loaded and often weaponized term woke began to be hurled into the swirling vortex of online criticism, and with a steadily escalating level of venom and intensity. The increasingly pervasive accusation, leveled by both casual moviegoers and seasoned industry analysts alike, was that Disney, in its demonstrably fervent eagerness to be perceived as thoroughly contemporary, impeccably socially conscious, and aggressively progressive, had inadvertently, or perhaps even deliberately, sacrificed the very core elements of timeless storytelling, the very magic that had defined the studio for nearly a century. Viewers increasingly voiced the deeply held feeling that the studio, once synonymous with enchanting narratives and universal emotional resonance, was now primarily, almost single-mindedly, interested in delivering a prepackaged message, a heavy-handed cultural commentary, rather than in simply enchanting and transporting them with a genuinely captivating and emotionally resonant narrative. The inherent sweetness, the whimsical wonder, the very essence of fairy tale magic that had been Disney's unique and invaluable brand identity for decades, now felt conspicuously overshadowed by what many perceived as a forced, often clumsy, and ultimately inauthentic push for modern sensibilities and contemporary social debates. It wasn't simply a matter of creatively reinterpreting a familiar story for a new generation. It was about fundamentally and perhaps irrevocably changing the very purpose of the story itself, seemingly shifting the central focus away from universally relatable human emotions, love, loss, courage, kindness, and towards a more didactic, agenda-driven approach to filmmaking that many found alienating and ultimately deeply unengaging. And the cold, hard reality of the impending box office numbers would soon brutally and undeniably reveal just how profoundly this perceived shift in priorities had resonated, or more accurately, hadn't resonated, with the wider, general movie-going audience. When the dust from the initial theatrical release finally began to settle, and the stark financial realities became inescapably clear, the numbers spoke for themselves in a language that even Disney's most optimistic executives couldn't ignore. Snow White 2025 was, by any objective metric, a resounding and deeply embarrassing box office bomb. Audience scores, aggregated across various platforms, plummeted to alarmingly low levels, signaling widespread dissatisfaction. Critical reviews, from respected film publications to influential online voices, were overwhelmingly scathing, often using words like disaster, train wreck, and unmitigated failure. And social media, the ultimate barometer of public sentiment in the 21st